about justice in communities of color. For some reason, we titled that Justice for Communities of Color, yeah. And I don't know exactly how we came up with that, but I was thinking about how I would be talking about this in relationship to the book. Have you guys read the book? Not yet? Not yet. It's very thought-provoking, very, I don't know, it's, but one of the things that I thought about was when I wrote a book. I wrote a book. The first book I read, and I'm gonna write some more. But this one just came out in 2015, and I want to read you if I find it. I want to read you a paragraph, a page. That when I first came out with the book, people thought that it was just out, like it was not really real. So, let me see if I can find it real quickly. Oh yeah, I found it. Good. So, okay, so the story that my book is a story about a young man growing up in Salinas. His name is Miguel Angel, and he has a girlfriend who lives in Pebble Beach. They meet playing sports. They both in cross country. And remember, this is a fictional story. And but Brittany's dad is very much against Mexicans, and he doesn't want his daughters to date Mexican kids. And so Brittany and her dad come back from an event, and dad is a little tipsy. He's a land use attorney, and they just went to an event, and they come back, and he's a little bit, on the tipsy side, and this is what happens in the scene. No, this is not the scene. Oops. Okay, well, I'm not going to read the scene because by the time I find it, it's going to be forever. But anyway, dad is very upset and tells Brittany, I don't want you to be dating a Mexican because Mexicans are good for nothing, and they're just going to go to Cabrillo, or they're going to go to Cornell, and he's never going to provide for you the life that I want you to have. And Brittany, doesn't pay attention to that. She goes on to her room and forgets about that, right? Here's the thing, every time I have white audiences read these, they tell me, oh, that character is just not possible. He is out of control. That's just too much. Every single time. I have people of color, especially Mexicans, read these and they go, that's my experience. That's exactly what happened. An old man who read this book told me, my wife, back then, my girlfriend, her dad did exactly that to her. That's what they're told. And I'm thinking, well, maybe this used to happen, 40, 50, 60 years ago when this old man was dating the woman is not his wife, right? Well, guess what? I wrote this book in 2015, and then 2016 we have a presidential candidate who is calling Mexicans rapists, calling Mexicans no good, calling Mexicans all these names and doing all these things. And I'm thinking, I cannot believe that you have people thinking that my book is, my character is out to lunch, that is out of control, that is not possible. And we have a man on a national stage talking about how our communities are less than. And so we really have to understand that the premise, this country was based on the premise, was established on the premise that, Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence said, all men are created equal, right? That was exactly at a time when African American men were being enslaved, when Native American people were being kicked out of their lands by treaties, and where people of Spanish descent in the Southwest were not being treated like the Anglo settlers, right? And so we have a system now that has been inherited, that has been passed on for 300 years, 500 years since the Spanish arrived, that continues to perpetrate those differences. And people still don't, sometimes have a hard time coming to terms with that. Especially, I hate to say it, but especially people of Anglo descent, because they have, and I say they because I don't belong to this particular group of people, and I know that it's not good to generalize, but at the same time, people of Anglo-American descent have benefited from the system that was established how many years and continues to be that way. And that's what that's one of the things that is very powerful about the book, that Claudia just keeps reminding us in the subtle ways that this continue to happen. And sometimes they're not really subtle, right? And so, for instance, I started reporting. I became a journalist exactly in 1994, which is when Proposition 187 was approved in California. Does anybody remember what Proposition 187 did? Yes.
Wasn't that the bilingual education proposition?
That was 209.
Oh. So
187. Does anybody remember?
Amnesty?
Proposition 187.
Amnesty?
No.
Nothing close?
No.
Can't
Prop
remember these days.
187, amnesty was not a bill in California. Amnesty, the
86 or
Immigration
something.
Control and Reform Act of 19. Yeah, I think it was actually passed in 1987.
Okay.
That was that's where you're getting confused. Is the year. That was giving permanent legal status. That gave permanent legal status to about 2 million people in the United States who previously
Should do
had
that
been
again.
here undocumented. Proposition 187 intended to deny education to all immigrant children who were here illegally. It would intend to deny medical and educational services. That was approved by 67% of the vote of California voters back in 1994. And it's credited with the decline of the Republican Party in California because the onslaught against it was really strong. From then on, the Republican Party was named in California as a party that does not want Latinos, does not want immigrants. Right?
I think Governor at the time, Pete Wilson, was behind it. That's what he was a Republican.
Right. He was down on the polls, and he decided to take it up so he could get reelected, and he did get reelected. And the Proposition 187 was approved, and he won. But what happened later was that it was stopped in the courts. The courts deemed it unconstitutional. But by then, all the sentiment anti-Republican had grown. So it was it really was a watershed in California in the system. I became a journalist in that year. So that was like 3 years old at the time. Just kidding. I became a journalist that year. And every time I think about why I became a journalist, I just think about that moment, and I think about how much there's a need in communities of color to have representation that is fair, that is accurate, but is also advocates for the rights of people who have less than. And so I don't know if there's a lot of my colleagues out there, there's a lot of journalism out there that is about like the grand opening of such and such store or whatever event that's happening. And I guess there's a need for such events like that, but in my particular preference, because there's just such a great need in our communities to shed light on issues that are that kind of issues, right? Immigration reform. I just came back from, you speaking more on immigration, right? We have right now 800,000 people in this country who were promised to have a temporary residency. That the administration of Trump just said, we're not going to have that anymore for you. These are the kinds of stories that I think that need to be reported more on and more in depth, but that we don't have sometimes because the media, there's so many troubles with the media right now. Right? School resource officers. There was a little controversy a few weeks ago because the city of Salinas wanted to bring back school resource officers to the high schools in the area. And the trustees in the area voted no. And they voted no unanimously because they didn't like the contract that were presented. Well, right now there's still an issue that is being fought because there's some other people in the community who think that that they want to see the cops in the schools. But the trustees are saying, we don't want our kids to be followed by cops in the schools. And it's happened before. When they had cops in the schools 10 years ago, the rate of kids that were deemed gang members was really high. Because whenever the kids did something wrong, they were asked to sign a contract that said, you are going to behave, and if you don't behave, you're going to be deemed a gang member, right? So whenever these kids were found on the street, let's say, kids, 17-year-old, 15-year-old kids, my godson who lives with me, it's 15, and he likes to go skate, and he likes to have saggy pants, and I just pull them up every time. But he's a kid. I know that eventually get it to his head that he should be doing that, right? But whenever kids like this were being found on the streets, they were at the time being harassed, and eventually they were deemed gang members, and eventually they were set on this path that they call it the school to prison pipeline. So and the trustees who remember that voted against this contract. Well, there's some people who don't like that. And so there's this tension in communities right now because this is a theory that I have, and I started with this, and I did mention Thomas Jefferson, the way this country was settled, was started, with the white people in power fighting against the Mexican, fighting against the Latinos and the African American people, subjugating all these races. We are at a time in our history that all these different groups are rising up and have gained some modicum of power. Very small amount of power. But the structure is not liking it. The systems that are in place really don't like that, and that's why they're fighting back so hard. There's communities out there that don't like to have police because they feel targeted. And when people are speaking up, the systems that are in place don't like and they're fighting back. And it's a really interesting time right now because of all the systems in play. I think that's part of the reason why we have the government that was elected, the Trump administration, because this segment of the community that was used to having a certain amount of power is seeing itself pushed out of the power sphere and is fighting back. So I think that's one of the reasons why this book, the Claudia's book, is interesting, because I think that even though communities of color are fighting and getting their way into the mainstream somehow, there's still so much push against it, and there are just so many ways in which we are being felt still now, less than, all the time, with the little slides that happen all the time. And that's what the book writes. The book talks about, right? And in a way, when I remember when every time I picked it up and I saw an example, it just made me think about not just Brittany's example, but also the example of my own life. I mean, I've really seen these play out over and over again, even though I'm not, I'm a woman of color, but I'm not African American, but I still can see it, I can still sense it. Susan.
What did you find most powerful in the book? The examples that you were mentioning in the book, what did you find most relevant in this?
I think that, like I was telling Eric the other day, it was really hard for me to actually get through it because it's very painful. And so I would pick it up and read something and just, for instance, I remember the very first day I opened it, and I opened it on the page, I'll show you which page. Page 37. Have you seen it? And I'd never seen this picture. When I saw it, every time I run into things like this in my daily life, I just think, what are people thinking? Why is this okay to do? What kind of people is she around that would not tell her, what you're doing is so degrading and so wrong? Why do you think it's okay to do something like this? So I opened the book at something like this, and I just closed it because and so I think that what was very powerful in the book is the way that it just gets into for me, into my skin. And it just stays there. And it feels like I took a bath again with the things that have happened to me that are just so much like this. I was reading, I'll tell you which one, that, every single one that I read, I can find something that relates to me. And so I'm going to read you this one, and I'll tell you the example that I remember in my life. And it's very recent too. It's on page 18 if you have the book. The new therapist specializes in trauma counseling. You have only ever spoken on the phone. Her house has a side gate that leads to a back entrance she uses for patients. You walk down a path bordered on both sides with deer grass and rosemary to the gate, which turns out to be locked. At the front door, the bell is a small round disc that you press firmly. When the door finally opens, the woman standing there yells at the top of her lungs, "Get away from my house! What are you doing in my yard?" It is as if a wounded Doberman Pinscher or a German Shepherd has gained the power of speech. And though you back up a few steps, you manage to tell her you have an appointment. "You have an appointment?" She spits back. Then she pauses. Everything pauses. "Oh," she says, followed by, "Oh, yes, that's right. I am sorry. I am so sorry, so sorry." A few months ago, my daughter had to go to Los Angeles. No, where did she go? I can't remember. No, yeah, she went on a trip. And because she lives in a bad part of, not really, no. She left her car with her friend's parents because she didn't want to get a ticket. In Oakland, you have to move your car so often, so it's not parked on the street for sweeping days. So she left her car in the Piedmont neighborhood, which is in the hills in Oakland. Very nice, fancy, beautiful homes, beautiful front yards, all manicured, whatever, right? And she asked me if I could, and she got a flat tire. She was gonna get home around midnight, and she asked me if I could fix her car so she wouldn't have to worry about not having a flat tire in the middle of the night and how she's gonna get home. Yeah, okay, that's good. And she told me the key is in Isabel's house. Okay, so I called Isabel's parents. "Hi, I'm Heidi's mom. I need to get the key to Heidi's car." "Okay, fine. We'll be home at 9 o'clock, blah, blah." Okay, so I get there at 9 o'clock, go up. There's this beautiful little house. Go up the stairs, the little yard, knock on the door. Somebody opens the door, and it's Isabel's dad. He's met me like 3 times. He opens the door, looks at me, and he spits What can I do for you? And he's looking at me like I'm this piece of garbage that just landed on his porch. And it's things that you cannot, honestly, these are things that you really cannot explain because you have to feel them. Really, you have to feel them. If you've never been in that position, you don't know what it's like to feel that this man who lives in this beautiful house that is not even his own house, because I know the story. This guy is living there by the grace of his mother-in-law who owns the house and lets everybody else live there because everybody lost their home during the housing crash. He still has the gall to treat me like I'm this brown woman who just is probably there asking for some leftovers somewhere. Anybody ever felt that way about something?
Yeah, I think many of us have had a similar experience, and it depends on how you feel about yourself sometimes as to how you respond. I probably would have said something very angry back at him had he said that to me. But it's been my experience over the years that typically if I'm met with aggression, I respond with aggression. And and that's not always the best way to handle a situation, but I can understand your feelings because I think I've had similar feelings in other situations.
Mm-hmm. Here's the thing, I was raised in Mexico. I was born and raised in Mexico. I came to the States when I guess I had just finished high school. And in Mexico, you are, the way I was raised, very Catholic, very obedient, and also very differential to upper middle class, the structure, because the structure there is that upper middle class people are all white, lower class people are brown like me, and we brown people, the country has this deference to white people, If you're white, then you're better. If you're dark skinned, then you're like, Indian, and you're just like garbage in a way. I was able to kind of like navigate that because I was smarter. I got good grades, I made me smart. But the feeling of being lesser than has always been with me, and it's hard because it came out that day. It comes out a very different, and I feel like I'm behind it, but it still comes out. And I noticed it, like for instance, one time I was at the airport in Mexico, and people in Mexico, especially even if they're not rich, but they want to be rich and they get their clothes on credit and they think they're all that because they have all these expensive clothes that they just get with a credit card. People have this attitude of treating people like they're dirt. So, and I've gotten at the airport many times, and when I was at the door of this lady, he came out. But you're also taught to be obedient, so you don't respond. You're supposed to be a good Catholic, obedient girl. So I would not have been able to respond with anger. I'm more trained like going like, whoa. And all I was able to say was, I'm Heidi's mom, and I need the key to her car. And he was immediately like, oh, like this woman. Exactly like this woman. Oh, I'm so sorry, right? Because they catch themselves being these people that are just putting out this vibe just because you're not what they expect, because they think you're just probably, seriously, the feeling I got was, are you gonna get do you want some leftovers? Are you gonna collect my clothing for Goodwill? Seriously, it was that kind of feeling that I got, that it was really horrible. But that was one. There's many, and I don't know. It's sometimes hard to. I kind of don't want to be talking about my own thing, and I don't know if you guys want to talk about these too, because I'm not used to like the me kind of thing. I don't know if anybody wants to interject here, interrupt me and say something. I can pick another example of the book and talk about it and see how it gets under you, and just you go to sleep with it. And
Well, I just think that sometimes, people have their perceptions. And I guess my question is, how do we change those perceptions? Because I know I have mine. And yesterday I went to my bank, and I went into like a little secure chamber, and then I did my deposit or whatever, and then I was coming out. There was a young man that was waiting outside. And so when I walked out, he walked in, he didn't have to use his access key. But afterwards, I thought, oh, should I let him in? I was just concerned about, he was a young man, and I think he was an African-American young man, light-skinned African-American man. But I had my perceptions about him, maybe he was a criminal, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And this is like, how do we undo our perceptions? Because there are some
I know.
statistic to support that, there is criminal activity in that group of people. So, some of it's right and some of it's not right, And so I think that a lot of people who are non-white have the perceptions, and some of it is right and some of it isn't right. So they're not totally wrong, and they have to think of protecting themselves and things like that. So I'm not saying that it's right, but I can understand that we have these things in us.
And I'm glad you bring it up, because I will tell you about an experience too, that where I had that experience too. And I went to Oakland, because of course my daughter must have moved to Oakland. I moved to Oakland. We went to a concert at night, and we're gonna park the car in this very dark alley. It's behind a shopping center, and I see these young African Americans by the, just kind of huddled in the dark, because it was raining. And so I'm gonna park the car, and I see him, and I'm thinking, wow, maybe I shouldn't park the car here, because what does this man want? He's just here, it's dark. And then I was like, wait, Claudia, that's not right. You're just you're falling into stereotypes. Maybe, he said it's nighttime, it's dark, it's raining, maybe he has nowhere else to go. You shouldn't be scared. So I left the car there. And I come back an hour later, and somebody broke a window, opened up my trunk, stole all my suitcases, left me with, luckily I had taken my purse, taken my credit card and my ID with me but I left my purse there. My purse was gone. Everything was gone.
If those young men had been...
I don't know if that was a young man. I'm just saying this happened, and so what were you gonna say?
No, I'm saying if those guys were black, right? The guys you saw standing by the car.
It was just one black man.
Okay, then if there was a Hispanic man or even a white man in the same situation, dressed the same way, would you have had the same feeling of trepidation?
I don't know, probably, but I don't know. But I wanted to not react to that. And then I was angry at myself, and angry also at this situation in which there's no jobs for African American men that have to be doing this kind of stuff. But here's also the thing, is that how do we change perceptions? And I think it goes back to what I was mentioning earlier about the founding of this country. There's a lot of inequity in this country. There's a lot of inequity. And so and that's what people are fighting for right now. We want to have more equity. People don't want to be perceived the way they are perceived. But also, we don't want to have to be yelling to have the rights that a lot of us feel is being denied to people. I mean, like you say, you would have been, if somebody does that thing to you, that they greet you with what do you want, you're going to respond angrily, because that's probably how you're being conditioned, right? Mm-hmm. That's because there's just you've gone through this crap for so many That's how I feel, you know, I don't know.
Well, you know, and I think there's a fine line, like, for instance, if that had been me in that same neighborhood, I'd have been just as cautious and leery
Yeah.
about the situation as you are. And I remember one time she and I went to San Francisco to have dinner at a restaurant we hadn't been, but it was like in a rough neighborhood. And I had second thoughts about leaving my car there because I saw people hanging around and, you know, made me feel a little uncomfortable. So I actually paid a guy to watch my car to make sure no one broke in. Man, I just thought that was just a normal feeling of wariness because of the neighborhood. Whether it be a white neighborhood, a black neighborhood, or a brown neighborhood. You know, and I think that...
So was it a Mexican neighborhood?
Huh?
Was it a Mexican neighborhood?
No, it was mixed. It was a mixed neighborhood.
You had something to say. What's your name, sir?
Who, my name? Oh.
Charles McCall.
Charles?
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
I go by Dread. Actually, I don't be watching the news. On TV, I watch sports, if anything, and that's another form of slavery. But the reality of it, we are conditioned to do this. That's why it's hard to come and talk about the situations we have when, wait, you may have put some names out there to upset somebody else because, whoa, this has happened to me. And this is a racial, and it's based on ignorance, straight up. The schools are not teaching the people what they need to know. The children, now, here lately, or within the last 10 or 20 years, these charter schools or people are doing collective work in certain neighborhoods to project those children above the per se norm, as in the Mexican race puts a lot of power within that baby when he's a child to make decisions because he becomes the interpreter of that family. Okay, he has thoughts in his head about, and what have they taught him? As we are kids, the first thing we're taught, sugar. If you're good, here. If we're going to change things, oh, McDonald's. But McDonald's does what? If we're going to change things, we literally have to take foot. Okay, you can't watch from the side and say, well, they're like that. But what are you doing? Literally. That's why I don't have too much yet. But we're conditioned. The news, I mean, why do you watch the news? And they were having a thing over here in Salinas. They were camping out on City Hall, and that goes back to thing, letting people know we're having problems around here. But did the news ever bring it up? What's their job? What is it? That's what gets me about KSBW, all of them. Why?
Anyway, when you say the news, you mean all of the news or just TV?
I mean the news that's
or-
right here in Salinas, in Monterey County.
Yeah, okay.
Now, I'm not talking about the worldwide news,
Well,
but
I mean,
right here,
part of the
control.
reason why I ask is because I belong to the news media. I'm a reporter with the Herald, and I try as much as I can to be more comprehensive than television news. So I just like to make this distinction sometimes. I know we are at fault as
But,
much
okay.
as everybody, but that's why I wanted to clarify. That's all.
But while I was gone, I mean, they were having City Hall meetings all the time, and these people out here camping.
Yeah,
And that was brought up, and what was this about?
yeah.
Okay, and there were white people there, you talking about people of color, that's what gets me, a community of color. A long time ago, they used to call people, black people of color, for the Negro, all that stuff, okay? And then they started branching out to be African or black, or what do you want to be exact for, as being African or European or whatever,
Yeah.
okay? So the community of colors, I'm somewhat understanding the scope of fitting everybody in together, but within that community of color, or Jamaicans, or Africans, or Nicaraguans, South Americans, okay? And so that means that they can clog us all together as a whole. They don't look at us as separate and tell them, oh, we can feed them all the same pill. Because why? Oh, well, that's before it's a community of color. And one took it. So, a lot of ways, we have to break off from all that. I mean, like the N-word, which takes me way, truly understanding, but when Rich Pryor said that on TV, that gave a color, that gave, I guess, the signal for everybody, no matter what color you are, or what nationality you are, you can use that N-word. I'm walking down the street, I'm here, I'm listening to the thing, I say, whoa, but those aren't brothers. Okay, but when I pop around, he's with one, but he's talking and said, well, you're not them, you're different.
Yeah.
Okay, and about, as me being in America, I don't see, that's why I don't go towards the South. I came from the South, I understand the South. And change in there is not going on. All these big things they have up there, these big old what do you call it, Montreal, the Custer or whoever.
Confederate monuments?
Oh, they got a place that makes monuments for like $100 some. And you put the women, see again, the women of the Southern Justice and the Southern Pride, okay, goes out and collects money for all this stuff. Okay, now who are you talking about? The Mexican population around here, they have pretty control over the Mexican population around here.
I think that, you know, I get several points there that you made. One that I want to talk about really quickly is that there's a local historian who is, her name is Carol McKibben, and she's going to be writing a story about Salinas, which I find very interesting. And one of the things that she is writing about is how when the whites mostly from the South, came to found Salinas, they chose to start the city where it is because, I mean, I don't know if that's what their intentions, but I have a feeling it is because I asked her about that. She started writing the story saying, oh, there was no Spanish enclave in Salinas. And I asked her, well, but there were ranchos around, right? There was El Arizal, and there was Boronda, and there was, so why did they choose to start Salinas where it is? Did they intentionally separate themselves from the Spanish settlements that were in the neighborhood? And here's the thing, we may not have the answer to that particular question, but we know for sure that when the Chinese started arriving, the Anglo population put them in Chinatown. They separated them intentionally. So here's the thing, we are accused a lot of separating ourselves. When I go into these forums and Facebook and all these media, people keep saying, oh, you guys want to be separate, you guys want to be known as Mexican American, or you want to be known as Latino, or you want to be known as African American. Guess what? We have been forced to choose which community we belong to since the founding of this country. This is not that we choose it, we have been forced to do it. And now being communities of color, I think that is a way for people to kind of band together. If we're together as people of color, maybe we'll have more power, maybe, because I know there's a lot of racism and a lot of internal strife within ourselves. I mean, I know that. I mean, I not because I want to paint myself as a good person, but man, I've been fighting with my mother about the way she describes African American populations for decades. And I keep doing it. But and the reason why I don't kind of do that is because I myself was told that the language I was using before was racist. You know, don't use that language. You know, even against my own people. In Mexico, we describe indigenous people very despectively as Indians, right? And I used to do that. Oh, that un indio. Es que es un indio, right? And I used to do that until somebody, an Anglo guy from the States, called me out on it. She said, that's horrible the way you talk about your own people. And I never realized that's what I was doing. So we all have our own internal issues. And so what's the answer? How are we going to get away from that? I mean, partially I think it's going to be a little bit of, it has to be economics. You know, people who are...
also education. I mean, I think that the bottom line is that we're all Americans. Now, we may section ourselves off due to our ethnic or racial backgrounds for cultural reasons or family reasons, but the bottom line is that we're all Americans. As long as we're committed to being good Americans, faithful Americans, and helping each other be good Americans, I think, you know, it's okay to have, you know, separate ethnic groups for cultural reasons or family reasons or whatever. But I think that what I think we should be getting away from having these groups be in opposition to each other, strictly based on color or ethnic background or whatever. You know, like for instance, they make hundreds of movies about the Alamo. And what a great thing it was to defeat the Mexicans at the Alamo. But you know, one of the primary reasons there wasn't a Mexican-American war is that the Mexicans said, we don't mind white settlers coming into Texas and Arizona, but you can't bring slaves. We don't like slavery.
Yeah.
Please do not bring slavery into our territory. The white Americans refused to go along with that. That's why there was a Mexican-American war. Now, they'll tell you a whole bunch of other stuff as to why that war occurred, but that was one of the basic reasons why it occurred. So the Mexicans long ago were saying, hey, we can accept black people into our territory. We want to accept them as equals, not as slaves. But that was against what the American principles were at that particular time.
And kind of that, to me, goes back to the reasons why we're in the mess we are, which is this idea that there's some people who are less deserving that, lower than others. The idea that there's some inferior groups is what really gets us into this mess. And it's right there. Like enslaving people is to think that they are lesser than. Taking their land away from them. I mean, I think that it gets me so much, and it makes me laugh. Sometimes I want to pull my hair out when I think when the Europeans came to these lands, they thought that Native Americans had a very backward culture, right? Why? Because they worshipped the land. They thought that the land had to be protected. They felt like the sky is their father, the earth is their mother, and the trees and the rocks are their brothers and sisters, right? And that, to the Europeans' way of seeing the world, that is backward. We are right now in the 21st century talking about how we need to protect the earth, because if we don't protect the earth, we're all going to die. So who is the backward person here?
That's right.
They're still doing the
Seriously.
same thing.
Huh?
They're still doing the same thing. They're still pumping oil up out of the thing.
And that's, yeah.
I mean, our government who's supposed to be there for us is doing what? Who are they paid for? It goes back to the oil. The people who are in office are paid for by them. You know, I mean, come on, reality of truth. McDonald's, look at the sign on McDonald's, 100% beef. Is there anything 100% in McDonald's? But they can get away with that lie. It's a straight lie.
And I think that also what you're talking about is how there's this worship of capital and money and
Yeah,
and profits and
it's all about profit.
And they want the profits to stay in their pocket. They only get uptight when blacks and browns are making profits. You know, they feel that the only people who should be rich in this country are white, and that's not right.
You know, one of the things, I guess, I find this book so powerful is it points out instances that, you know, we're potentially sort of unconscious of, that you move through life and things happen. I like the one in the grocery store where, you know, she's at the checkout counter and the checkout woman is kind of dismissive, and then she looks to her friend to support her and the friend looks away as if, I don't want to get involved. And I mean, that's, you know, it's kind of a, or I don't want to support you against this white woman who's kind of accusing you of something, and she feels like it's a betrayal. And so there are tiny little things that accumulate and mean a lot. And so I think that sense of being aware how we move through the world, and there are ways we treat people that are small but dismissive in ways that we, unless we stop and think or move consciously through the world, we don't realize. I told this at a couple of days ago, maybe at the film, but I just listened to NPR on Saturday, and they were talking about an essay contest, or the essay that all Texas students have to write to get into college. And so this is the official question for all Texas high school students if you want to apply to a Texas college. And it's about, it used to be, imagine an encounter with a person who, you know, from another ethnicity or race, and how that person is going to teach you an important lesson. So they've changed it from imagine to, you know, talk about something that really did happen to you when you, met with somebody from a different race or culture and how they, what you learned. But of course, the essay question is written for white people. It's not written for an African American, like show how you met a white person and straighten out, taught you a new perspective. So it's really about whites meeting other ethnicities and races. So the whole question is geared towards white students and leaves out everybody else. And so, I don't know, that's still the state of Texas official question for all high school students. So there's just a kind of unconscious quality to that. I mean, that you're thinking from a white perspective and you don't even think, how is this question going to sound to somebody who's African American? And I think that's what this book does a really good job of kind of pointing out the things we take for granted. Or,
I'd be curious to hear more about that, because I think that in this, here the Brown section, we've been talking a lot about how we, but, what can be done really? Because I think that this world is really being established by white people, for white people, to write essays addressed to white students. How do we change that? People call it the white privilege, and then a lot of people get offended when you tell them that, because that's exactly an example of white privilege. You write an essay that is for white kids, not taking into account the experience of the brown kids. But then if you point it out, then you're like, oh, you're sour grapes, or get over it. Oh, slavery was 500 years ago, you should be fine by now. I mean, seriously, I got into an argument on Facebook that I usually don't get into Facebook, but that one got me because there was this guy who, they were talking about Confederate corners. Have you heard about that? So there's a place, south by Spreckles. It's called Confederate Corners. That place, I suppose, was established by the people who came and founded Salinas, and they established this place to honor the Confederacy.
That's where they started.
And so there was an article in the paper, a discussion ensued, and this person wrote on Facebook, oh, people should get over about slavery because we're all slaves now in capitalism. We're all slaves, we all have to pay our debts and stuff, and oh my God. And so I got in there and I go, wait a second, being a slave to capitalism doesn't mean that you have to show your teeth to the highest bidder, that your kid gets taken away from you to be sold by an auction, that your ancestors were brought in ships across the ocean and died. People talk like that sometimes and they don't realize how hurtful and stupid. Honestly, that's godless. So how do we change that? I'll get off my soapbox.
Well, I think like you're doing now. I mean, educating people, exposing people to what the realities of the world are about, past and present, and what is our projection for the future. I'm old enough to remember that when I was in high school, I got out of high school in 1958. About 17 or 18 of the states in the United States openly practiced segregation and Jim Crow laws, the law of the land. Certain colleges I knew I could never get into because I was black. I played football in college, University of Iowa, and we had the first black quarterback to play major college football. Minnesota had the second one. And that was a big deal. But as a result, a lot of teams wouldn't schedule to play against us because we had a black quarterback and too many other black players. Now that's all changed now. When you look at television now, or football, or basketball, anything, it looks like there's no racial problem existing in this country at all because everybody is all mixed together. But in my lifetime, I can remember then that wasn't true. I am pleased and proud to have been a part of some of these things changing, but I can still see that for my kids and my grandkids, there's still a lot that needs to be done. So,
and then you have Colin Kaepernick
Yeah.
protesting for and not getting not getting a contract.
Yeah, that did
Because
not
he's
do
doing
that.
something that people don't like.
Yeah, but his thing is, when he came on board and to do something like that, and kids start doing the same thing, kneeling on one knee, because this is your right, everybody's not per se red, white, and blue. I'm a vet, and I believe in it, but I think everybody has their right too, because we all believe in different forms of what's spiritual, what's real, okay, and that's the right to project that as been a true democratic American, okay, and somebody said, well, you were wearing the wrong colors. It's like Halloween. On Halloween, everybody wants to dress up as a what? Okay, and like I don't do that. I wear what I wear, and it's like, oh, you don't get involved. You don't like this? No, it's not that I don't like it. It's just that it's such a far-fetched, crazy thing. I mean, and you're gonna send your kids to collect candy from who and from where?
It's interesting, there was an editorial, like maybe just last week, like maybe Colin Kaepernick isn't any good, or isn't good, you know, he's not, I don't know. I mean, I know nothing about football, so I wouldn't know how to assess his skills, or, and that's curious, because I wanted to sort of Xerox articles about Colin Kaepernick and to kind of accompany the
Here's the thing,
Serena Williams
he's-
section, so I don't know why he didn't get a contract.
He's
Is it
black
because-
also.
And he's black, is it because of what he
That's
did? Or
what's
is
wrong with this country.
You know what, and this is the funny thing, Susan. He is great.
Yeah.
He's a great player. But this is what happens in this country. If you are a brown person and the media, which is really white dominated, starts saying, oh, maybe you're just not good enough.
troublemaker, or, yeah.
Affirmative action. I remember there's this thing, and I was thinking about the affirmative action thing, right? I had a straight A. I've always been pretty good in school because I have a good memory. So I just remembered that data. That's how I got through school, because if you ask me if I understood, half of it I didn't. You know, I remember I had to study Marx when I was in high school. I didn't understand what the hell was going on, but I memorized it. I passed the test with A's and B's ever since I was in high school. So I got a really good scholarship to go to UC Santa Cruz. And I got interviewed by a white girl in the college newspaper. And she asked me, are you getting this because of affirmative action?
Oh.
And I was thinking, dude, man, I have a 4 point something in Cabrillo College. I'm transferring. I probably have better grades than you do. I didn't say that because, you know, but I was just thinking, that's what you do. So, because white people are in power in the structures, all they have to do is say, well, calling is not good enough, so that's why. And then people believe that. It's unbelievable. It's incredible to me. It really is. And you know what? You don't really realize it until you're in the midst of it for years. When I first started in journalism,
Propaganda is for.
all the bosses and all the kind of like the journalistic thing is to just trust, like trusted sources, right? And trusted sources mean politicians, heads of cities, heads of businesses, right? Hardly ever you were supposed to trust non-profit organizations because they have an agenda. So if you have a non-profit organization that is advocating for the poor, you have to question their motives because they have an agenda. But a businessman, oh, that's a reputable person. Nothing against business people, nothing against them. But I'm just saying, why do we give this way to business people, but not to nonprofits that are representing the poor? It's the system that has been established that dictates what the rules are, and we all follow them and don't question them. And Colin is a great player, but right now he means bad business for the
NFL.
the NFL, and so there has to be. But they're not going to say that, and that's what's been great about the system that we've been creating, because the system that we've been creating is not that we are racist. No, we're not racist, but they're just not good enough. They're just not smart. That's how they get away with this. It's amazing.
But you know, he can probably go to Europe, play football in Europe,
Or even
Everybody
Canada.
else does,
So he's
huh?
in Canada now?
He said he could go to Canada.
Yeah, because, see, the whole thing is the NFL is per se, that's the place to play. Okay, and,
Yeah,
and why? Because they pay more money. It's not that they're better football players, but they pay more money and they have corporate things. Everything's lined up corporately, like McDonald's. I cast a check, well, I went to McDonald's, it's right across the street from my house, and had money in my bank, but I didn't know it was in my bank, so I just slide my card in there, and it usually it won't go to my checking until I go to get it. But McDonald's has such power, I mean, I guess the way they run it is like, once it goes in there, boom, and McDonald's, oh, they're going to the bank, they ain't gotta wait for you, they can go get your money. It was a trip, I said, whoa, that was unique at McDonald's,
Yeah.
and that's the only place, because I've gone to other stores and did that, and they wouldn't go. But McDonald's is different.
I have this little pet peeve of mine which has to do with paying with debit cards. Places that charge you for
Yeah.
when you pay with your debit card.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't
that.
go to those, yeah.
Because it's like you're getting my money directly
Yeah,
from my
yeah,
card and,
yeah.
and I have
No
to pay you
charge.
for it. Forget about it, you know, I'll give you cash or I won't give you anything.
To answer your question, I think more white people need to give up their seats and understand where they have made the system so inequitable, and it's a lot of hard work, but without that, there's gonna be people that are gonna keep questioning and being like, oh, well, you got affirmative action, as opposed to you're actually a really good person and you've done really well and you're smart and you have a great perspective and
Yeah.
you know, your ties to.
And I think that's why it's going to be really difficult to do because the system has really benefited white people and you know, and I can understand white people's frustration because it's not their fault, you know, it's like they say, I did not own slaves. Yeah, I agree. You did not, your family probably didn't, you didn't, but
But you benefit.
Yeah.
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So there's this woman on Facebook who says that I'm just renting my house in Pacific Grove for $2,000 or I don't know how much. And I only pay, the mortgage is only $1,000, but I need the money to live on. And I jumped in, I usually don't do that, but I jumped in, I go, wait a second. You are charging $2,000 for a house that is costing you $1,000? That is greed. Oh, well, I just need to live on. I said, yeah, you need to live on. You need a person to have 3 or 4 jobs in order for you to live on. I mean, that is white privilege. And I'm sure that woman, she was a white person. But this person, this woman felt that she was within her rights to be charging these exorbitant amounts of money for somebody to live in. I mean, it really is nutty, it's backwards, it's very unjust. But how do you, I mean, I really thank people who are enlightened and courageous to be here because I know it's painful, it's gotta be painful, but it's so needed.
But the part of that is the pain of being all white that's also painful. What do you think? That there's also a lack of connection with other people with different perspectives that white people by closing in on ourselves and not recognizing the system that we're benefiting from, we lose those connections and we lose the different perspectives and the new thinking, and that's painful, and that's how we hurt ourselves with our white privilege system.
Can I say something?
Sure, yeah. Anybody, jump in.
I think that the white people need to remember the history. White people never owned this country. Everybody here is an immigrant. Everybody here came as an illegal. Everybody. The real Americans were killed and were segregated and educated in what they call reservation. Those are the real and the unique American people that own this country. And that's what this guy When I told him, California is Mexico, if you like it or not, I don't care. And he was like infuriated. Just read the real history. The real history. And you know that you're living in Mexico.
And right now, it's something really ugly going on too. In certain levels, of discussion is that people want to make these, white country. They call it, we have to make this a white country again. That's that perception, right? Well,
It was never.
it never was a white country to begin with, people. But that's a lot of people who support Trump and doing the whole Hail Hitler and stuff. That's what they want, and it's scary.
So I had this summer, oh my goodness, I helped teach a social justice program at Berkeley, but out, well, anyways, there's lots of discussion. There was this professor of like service learning or community service or something like that out of Northwestern, and he came all the way over to Berkeley, talking to these kids, and he was trying to introduce them to the San Francisco Bay Area, because these kids are from all over the place. And he said that, the gold rush was the first, like, there weren't anybody on the San Francisco Peninsula. Freaking kidding me? What are you saying at all?
Like, this is a vast open land.
Yeah, nobody else was here. I'm like, oh my goodness. I'm like, thank goodness that there's time for us instructors to go back with our students and say like, yeah, he was wrong. Like, do you understand what's wrong with that thinking? It is this white professor, educated, has this platform to talk to all these young people, and here he's spewing off what he thinks is true. Like, oh my goodness. We are living in Mexico, and hello, like, can we not understand that there's Native people that were here?
Two major, yeah, don't even get me started.
And that's, this, what's sad is that then this professor, he donates a ton of money apparently to the program at Northwestern. And so he always, every year, gets this platform to talk to young people. I'm like, why are we continuing to support this person? Yeah, that money is really great, but what's the consequence to that?
Yeah.
Right?
Has anyone tried to correct him or refuted what he's been saying?
Yes, and we sort of got reprimanded this year for doing that kind of
Wow,
thing.
man, well, yeah, because he definitely needs to be dealt with.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so far from the truth.
Trump's president.
It was printed well before that.
It's sometimes so hard to go against the current and do things differently and refute like all these things. It's really difficult. And the people who do it sometimes, and people don't want to do it because I think we are conditioned as human beings to be liked. That's how we survive, right? Little kids, you're cute, then you get fed, and so on and so forth. And so you don't want to be, it takes a lot to be the person who speaks up. It does.
Wow.
It takes a lot to be, especially for people of color, because then the establishment tells you, oh, you're the angry bitch, or whatever.
Retaliation comes,
Yeah.
yeah.
So.
Yeah, and that's why organizations in the various communities should be in place to help. My mother was the first African-American teacher I'm from New Jersey. She was the first African-American teacher in my hometown. And every time she applied on her own, of course, she was rejected. She got the NAACP involved. She got all the ministers and black ministers in town involved. And all of a sudden, a groundswell of protests came up relative to why aren't you hiring this qualified black woman to be a teacher. So she became not only a teacher, she eventually became a principal, first black principal. But because she got the job first, that opened the door for several other black teachers to get in. So it usually takes one or two people, standing up along with the backing of people and groups from that community to stand up to make a difference. And all through our history, we can see how that's made a difference in every Cesar Chavez standing up for Mexican workers. I mean, what a difference that has made. And of course, he was brutalized initially for standing up, but eventually he got the kind of groundswell of support he needed. So in each community, it takes somebody to stand up, or a group to stand up and say, hey, we want to make a change.
I think it's gonna take a lot of alliances, color and white alliances to be made, because I think that there's just gonna be a lot of resistance, and also in the older generations, just like that professor you're talking about, I think they don't realize how they're benefiting and how they're doing things, and it's just gonna take a lot.
Well, it looks like you made the first step here tonight. You know, where do we sign up?
Where are we saying?
There you go.
Anything else you guys want to talk about? I think we scheduled until 6:30 or
So 6:30.
yeah, so we're pretty much good on time.
Yes.
I don't know if there's 6:43. Holy back.
Are there going to be a continuum of these kind of sessions? Or we obviously need to
Yeah, need to
put
get
the
more
word
people
out and get
involved.
more people to come.
Yeah,
I think the whole series based on the book have been really kind of like springboard for these kinds of conversations. They all have been, I'm sure. There's going to be, Surya is going to be talking about
Policing the Imagination, which is actually a line from Citizen, and that's going to be on October 11th. So yes, every Wednesday until October 16th, or actually the 18th is the Wednesday last week.
I'm curious, like, from your journalist perspective, it's about what else is happening here? Like, I can see things nationally, and like, you know, I can try and do things nationally, but what needs to be done for justice for people of color here?
Well, the two big ones right now I can see. One is the whole issue, the tension with police. Well, not actually three, now that I think about it. Homelessness is huge. And that's just justice for people in general. And I think that one of the things that really gets me is that there seems to be very little compassion in general. I was very happy to see that the board of supervisors, well, it was Jane Parker and her district, that instead of kicking people out of Lapis Road, I don't know if you heard about that, but there was this issue of the people parking on Lapis Road, and people were complaining, oh, there's garbage, or there's this, there's that. And people were just being angry about this group of people, and I'm thinking, my goodness, this group of people already have nowhere to go. They have to live in their cars, and on top of that, we're angry at them because they're making the place dirty. Where is our freaking humanity, people? Seriously, things like this get me so angry. So I was glad that, and half of the time I really can't do anything because I'm supposed to be a journalist who's like neutral. I'm glad that somebody stepped up, because it's a good thing also to realize that I'm not the only one who's doing this, that there's other people taking care of. But homelessness is a big one. Immigration reform is huge. We have in this county about 65,000 people who live here without documents, and most of them have to work in the fields, picking our crops, picking our food. That's huge. And the third one I would say is police and community relations. That's huge, because I think that police, for better or for worse, they are a symbol of the establishment. And the establishment has not been good for a lot of people. And so when the people coming, when I say people, it's just regular people and people of color, really, who are the ones who get the brunt of the suspects, you're not doing, you don't behave, you're not doing things right. And that has come to a head here in this community in the last couple of years. So those are the three big ones that I would watch out for. Do you live in Salinas?
I live in Seaside.
Okay.
Jane Parker district.
Yeah.
And I was aware of this, but I wasn't aware of what happened. I just was seeing it happen, and then
Yeah, it's been brewing for the last few months, and it just finally came to a head because people were complaining about that issue. Because people are getting pushed out of their houses because they're so expensive, because we have to support this woman who charges $2,000 for her mortgage because she needs to live on. It's like, man, go get a job, girlfriend, like everybody else, seriously.
You know, I was reading something about the people across the river. We're related as being on the other side of the river, and this is probably the most fertile place that there is. It transferred from military to agriculture because of Salinas Valley.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a river, and they took that and made it what it is today. But they needed slaves, so it was here, the Mexican people that was here.
Yeah.
Okay, and then those are descendants of Spaniards. Okay, and the thing with the Catholic Church. Crazy.
Thank you so much for being here. I hope you continue the conversation. I know you will have a conversation later on.
Now, are you teaching at the college?
No, I used to teach. Right now I'm just working journalist.
I'll tell you one of the
Writing
other,
stories for the newspaper.
Okay.
That's all I'm doing right now.
one of the other solutions that you could consider is getting involved in anything that's already your passion, anything that you can do, within your reach. Anything positive, just even your neighbors that you see are just having a little bit of hard time or whatever. Just even talking to them, not even money or just some kind of positive energy.
Yeah.
Just
to
keep
have-
pushing
build-
it.
Build community, yeah.
Right? I mean, the Lapis Road thing, I was actually a big instrument in that because the sheriffs went and slapped everybody with an orange sticker. The real problem issue people left. Marina's got a thing against RVs. Monterey's got a big thing against RVs. Even people sitting on the sidewalk. Salinas has a no sit no lie. They're out to get RVs as well. That's kind of one of the big reasons people got pushed out there. They wanted it to be just everybody's gone, nobody can ever come back. And by talking and working with Jane Parker's office, there was a lot.
Yeah.
So getting involved, talking to people, doing these kind of things, and just raising awareness to other people.
Thanks, Wes. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.